Before there were kingdoms, there was Kale, a god of endless power, worshipped by a civilization that no longer exists. He could reshape mountains with a thought, erase plagues with a breath. He had lived 10,000 years, and in all that time, he had never once felt afraid, because gods cannot lose anything they haven't chosen to keep. That was the problem. Kyle had never chosen to keep anything, until a mortal woman named Senna looked directly at him, not with worship, not with fear, but with the particular disrespect of someone late for something more important, and told him to move because he was standing in her doorway. No one had spoken to Kale like that in 10,000 years. He didn't kill her. He didn't curse her. He did something far more dangerous. He got curious. For 1 year, disguised as a traveling stranger with no powers, no memory of his godhood revealed to her, Kyle lived in Senna's village. He learned what it meant to be cold, to be hungry, to wait for someone and not know if they'd come back. He learned that mortal love wasn't a lesser version of anything. It was terrifying specifically because it could be lost. And that terror was the entire point. By the end of that year, Kyle understood something no god before him ever had. Immortality wasn't power. It was the absence of stakes. And a life with nothing at stake wasn't a life at all. It was just time, endlessly passing, meaning nothing to no one. So Kyle did what no god has ever done. He walked into the Temple of Endless Years, where his own immortality was sealed inside him like a second heartbeat, and he tore it out. The other gods tried to stop him. They screamed that mortality wasn't a gift, it was a punishment, that he was choosing decay, disease, the slow horror of watching everyone he'd ever loved die before him, followed eventually by his own death, permanent and absolute. Kyle already knew all of that. He did it anyway. "You gave me forever," he told them, as his golden blood turned red for the first time in 10,000 years. "And forever never once made me feel alive." She did that in a single conversation. He returned to Senna as a mortal man with a mortal heartbeat, and for the first time in his existence, felt his own pulse and understood. This was the sound of a life that could actually end. And that sound, terrifying, fragile, finite, was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. Senna never learned he had been a god. She just knew him as a man who looked at ordinary mornings like they were miracles, who cried at sunsets for no reason he could explain, who held her hand like he understood. On some level she couldn't name exactly how temporary it was. They had 43 years together. Not 10,000. 43. When Kyle died, an old man, gray-haired, surrounded by children and grandchildren who never knew what he'd given up to have them, his final thought wasn't regret. It was gratitude. Because somewhere in a temple that no longer remembers his name, there's an empty space where a god's immortality used to be. And if you ask the few who still study the old texts, they'll tell you the strangest part of Kale's story isn't that a god became human. It's that, out of every possible choice available to an all-powerful being who could have anything, he chose the one thing that could be taken away.